Racist officers stop a black woman, but when they discover her husband is a retired colonel, fear gripped Louise Carter when she saw the flashing lights in her rearview mirror. She had just left the mall with some medical textbooks she'd purchased to update her personal library. She had parked her car near the main exit and was just storing her purchases in the trunk when two police officers approached aggressively, without any prior explanation. "License and registration now," shouted the taller one, a robust man with a severe expression who identified himself only as Sergeant Richardson. Louise, surprised by the approach, remained calm and reached for her purse to get her wallet. "Slow. Down with that hand." The second officer, who would later introduce himself as Officer Martinez, pointed his finger at her with an expression of contempt. "I'm just getting my documents as requested," replied Louise, feeling her heart race. She had experienced discrimination before, but never with such explicit hostility. As she handed over her ID and medical license, Louise hoped the situation would resolve quickly. However, the sergeant barely glanced at the documents before letting out a mocking laugh. "Doctor, you." The sergeant exchanged glances with his colleague. "Everybody claims they're doctors, that they work at the hospital, but this looks more like the talk of someone who shoplifts from designer stores. Please, you can verify. I'm a neurosurgeon at St. Luke's Memorial Hospital. I'm just putting books in my car," Louise explained, trying to keep her voice steady while pointing to the volumes visible in the open trunk. Officer Martinez picked up one of the books and flipped through it disdainfully. "You think being well-dressed means you can go wherever you want, huh?" he said, tossing the book back into the car carelessly. "We're going to search your bag." Without waiting for permission, the officer snatched the purse from Louise's hands and began spreading its contents across the hood of the car. People around began to stop and watch, some even taking out their phones to film the scene, but no one intervened. "This ID is fake, right?" taunted Sergeant Richardson, holding her American Medical Association card between his fingers as if it was something dirty. "Never seen a doctor driving such a modest car." The humiliation lasted nearly 20 minutes. Louise, cornered against her own vehicle, felt tears of anger and frustration forming, but held them back. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. What those officers didn't know was that Louise wasn't alone in this fight. A few miles away, in an apartment in Chicago's Gold Coast neighborhood, Anthony Morgan, retired colonel from the U.S. Army, and Louise's husband received a call from an unknown number. Setting aside the documents he was analyzing on his desk, he answered with a firm voice, "Morgan, Colonel, this is Lieutenant Oliver. I just received information that your wife is being confronted by police officers in the Magnificent Mile. Mall parking lot, the situation appears hostile." Anthony felt his blood run cold. It wasn't the first time Louise had faced situations involving racism, but something in the young lieutenant's tone alerted him that this time was different. "I'm on my way," he responded, hanging up and grabbing his car keys. Anthony Morgan had left the Army 5 years earlier, after exposing a corruption scheme involving high-ranking officers. The repercussions of the case were hushed up, but his career was marked. He preferred to step away, and since then had secretly coordinated an independent task force, investigating abuses of authority in law enforcement. While driving toward the mall, he remembered the countless times Louise had come home with stories of small daily humiliations. As a black female doctor, she constantly faced the suspicious looks of patients who doubted her abilities or confused her with nurses and cleaning staff. But she always preferred to move forward, believing her work would speak for itself. This time, however, something would be different. Anthony knew this confrontation wasn't just another isolated case. It was part of a larger pattern he had been meticulously documenting. Back at the parking lot, Louise was finally gathering her belongings that had been scattered by the officers. Her hands trembled slightly, but her gaze conveyed renewed determination. "You're going to hear from me again," she said, staring at the two officers, "and not as a victim." Sergeant Richardson laughed with disdain. "Is that a threat, Doctor?" he asked, making air quotes when pronouncing the title. "Be careful what you say. Some people disappear for much less." At that moment, a car parked abruptly near them. Anthony Morgan stepped out of the vehicle with the erect posture his years in the Army had given him. He was wearing civilian clothes, but there was something about his presence that made the officers instinctively adjust their stance. "Is there a problem with my wife, gentlemen?" he asked in a calm but authoritative voice. "Just a routine stop," responded Officer Martinez, suddenly less confident. "We were just leaving." Anthony approached and put his arm around Louise's shoulders. "I'd like to know your full names and precinct," he said, taking his phone out of his pocket. "That won't be necessary, sir," retorted Sergeant Richardson, backing toward the patrol car. "As my colleague said, we're already leaving." "I insist," Anthony stepped forward, "and I want you to know that this is neither the first nor the last time we'll meet." The officers quickly got into their patrol car and departed, leaving the couple in the parking lot, surrounded by onlookers who were still filming the scene. "Are you okay?" asked Anthony, turning to Louise. "I am," she replied, taking a deep breath. "But I'm done staying silent. I won't let this slide anymore." On the way home, Louise recounted all the details of the encounter. Anthony listened attentively, asking occasional questions, but his mind was already formulating the next steps. Louise's case would be the perfect catalyst to expose what he had been investigating for years. Arriving at their apartment, they were greeted by Peter, their 17-year-old son. The teenager immediately noticed something was wrong. "Mum, what happened?" he asked, setting aside the guitar he was playing. Louise hugged her son and summarized what had occurred. Peter, outraged, showed them a video that was already circulating on social media. "It's all over the internet," he said, showing his phone screen where a recording of the confrontation had more than 5,000 views in just 1 hour. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially to subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us who are just starting out." Now continuing, Anthony observed the video carefully, noting details that might be useful later. The images didn't capture the entire encounter, but they were enough to prove the officer's inappropriate behavior. "I'm going to contact some people," he said, heading to his office. Peter looked at his mother, concerned. "What's Dad going to do?" "What he should have done a long time ago," answered Louise, with a determination that surprised even herself. "And so will I." The next morning, Louise woke up resolute. During breakfast, she shared her plans with the family. "I'm going to file a formal complaint and give interviews. People need to know this happens every day to those who don't have a retired Army colonel as a husband." Anthony nodded, proud of his wife. "I have some contacts who can help, but you need to be prepared. They'll try to discredit you in every possible way." "I'm tired of being afraid," responded Louise. "If we do nothing, who will protect Peter and other young people like him?" Their son observed his parents' conversation with both admiration and concern. "Can I help somehow?" he asked. "For now, maintain your normal routine," answered Anthony. "But stay alert to anything unusual at school or on the street." That afternoon, Louise went to the police department's Internal Affairs Division to file a complaint. She expected resistance, but wasn't prepared for the complete indifference with which she was received. "Ma'am, without images or witnesses, it's difficult to prove any wrongdoing," said the employee, a middle-aged man with deep circles under his eyes, who barely raised his gaze from the computer. "There are videos circulating on social media," argued Louise. "Then we suggest you submit your complaint online attaching those videos," responded the man, pushing a pamphlet toward her. "Next." Frustrated, Louise left the building and called Anthony. "Just as we expected. They're going." "To make everything difficult." "Don't worry," he replied. "We're already working on other avenues." The "we" Anthony referred to included his small but efficient team. Besides Lieutenant Oliver, who still served in the Army but collaborated discreetly, there was Marina Stevens, a former prosecutor, and Carlos Lawson, a specialist in digital technology and security. Together, they had been cataloging cases similar to Louise's, looking for patterns and connections. Meanwhile, at the 37th Precinct, a young detective watched with interest as the video showing Louise's encounter spread. Raphael Campbell had joined the police force with dreams of making a difference, but quickly realized the system was more interested in maintaining the status quo. Still, he kept his principles and worked discreetly to do what was right. Raphael knew Sergeant Richardson and Officer Martinez well. Both had reputations for being heavy-handed and had several complaints in their records, all dismissed for lack of evidence. Something about this new case, however, seemed different. The victim's husband wasn't an ordinary person, and Raphael knew this might finally bring consequences. Determined to act, Raphael began gathering information about the officers involved. He discovered that both were part of a specific group within the department, internally known for their efficient approaches in affluent areas of the city. The term was a euphemism for the practice of intimidating people the officers deemed out of place in those locations, almost always black people or those with a humble appearance. At the Morgans' home, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. The video of the encounter had gone viral nationally, and journalists were seeking interviews with Louise. After talking with Anthony, she decided to accept an invitation to appear on a TV program the following day. "I need to use this opportunity to speak for all the people who go through this daily," she said. "I'm proud of you," replied Anthony, embracing her, "but we need to be prepared. They'll try to discredit you somehow." As Anthony had predicted, the next morning, hours before the scheduled interview, an edited video began circulating on social media. In it, manipulated excerpts of the encounter made it appear that Louise had been aggressive with the officers from the beginning. Peter was the first to see the fake content through messages he received from school friends. "Mom, Dad, you need to see this," he called, showing his phone to his parents. Louise watched the video with indignation. "This is completely false. They cut out parts and joined different moments together." Anthony was already on the phone with Carlos Lawson. "Carlos, we need an urgent technical analysis of this video. We need to prove it was manipulated before Louise's interview." While Carlos worked on analyzing the video, Louise prepared for the interview. She decided she would not be intimidated or back down. "I'll use this attack as an example of what they do to silence victims," she said, as she dressed in an elegant, understated navy blue outfit. The program Truth in Focus, hosted by journalist Cynthia Torres, was known for its direct, no-nonsense approach. When Louise arrived at the studio, she was informed that the commander of the precinct to which the officers involved belonged had also been invited to give the official version of events. "Do you mind?" asked the producer, visibly nervous. "Not at all," replied Louise confidently. "I believe in dialogue." Major Lucas Andrews, a man of about 50 with impeccable posture, formally greeted Louise before the program began. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I regret the incident, Doctor. We're investigating internally. I hope this investigation will be more efficient than previous ones, Major," responded Louise, holding his gaze. When the cameras started rolling, Cynthia Torres introduced the topic and the guests. Louise related her experience in a firm voice without hesitation, detailing each moment of the aggressive encounter. When she mentioned the edited video that had emerged that morning, the host intervened. "We've received a preliminary technical analysis of that manipulated video," said Cynthia. "Our experts have confirmed that there was malicious editing of the original content." Major Andrews looked uncomfortable. "We have no official knowledge of this manipulation, but we guarantee that the institution does not condone this type of practice," he stated, adjusting his tie. "As for the encounter itself, we're investigating the facts. If there was excess, those responsible will be punished." "Major," Louise leaned slightly forward, "how many complaints against these same officers have been dismissed in recent years? I have information that I'm not the first to report abusive behavior from them." The question caught the officer by surprise. Before he could formulate a response, Cynthia Torres added, "According to research by our production team, Sergeant Richardson has 7 complaints for abuse of authority in the last 3 years, all dismissed for lack of evidence, and Officer Martinez has 5 similar complaints. Could you comment on that?" The major visibly hesitated before responding. "These are numbers that need to be contextualized. Officers who work in high-traffic areas naturally receive more complaints that coincidentally get dismissed without proper investigation," interrupted Louise. "Major, the problem isn't just 2 police officers. It's a system that protects and encourages this type of behavior. The interview continued for another 20 minutes, with Louise maintaining her composure while exposing not just her personal experience, but a systematic pattern of behavior. At the end, her words moved viewers across the country. "I'm not here just as Louise Carter, a doctor who was publicly humiliated. I'm here for all the people who go through this daily and don't have a voice or resources to defend themselves. I'm here for my son, and for all the young people who shouldn't have to grow up fearing those who should protect them." When the interview ended, Louise received a warm embrace from the host. "Your courage will inspire many people," said Cynthia. On the way back home, Louise received a call from Anthony. "You were amazing," he said, with evident pride in his voice. "But I need you to come directly to Marina's office. We have important news." At Marina Stevens' office, located in a commercial building downtown, Anthony, Carlos, and Lieutenant Oliver were already assembled when Louise arrived. "What did you find out?" she asked, still energized from the interview. "Two things," answered Marina, indicating a chair for Louise to sit. "First, Detective Raphael Campbell from the 37th Precinct has contacted us. He has information about a group within the department that might be behind these systematic approaches." "And why did he decide to help?" questioned Louise. "He says he joined the police to make a difference but is frustrated with what he sees daily," explained Marina. "Your interview today gave him the courage he needed to speak out." "And the second thing?" asked Louise. Carlos turned his laptop toward her. "We've gained access to the mall's security cameras. They clearly show that you didn't do absolutely anything to justify the approach. The officers simply singled you out." Louise observed the images in silence. Seeing the scene from another angle, perceiving the clear racial motivation of the approach brought tears to her eyes. "This can't go unpunished," she said, wiping her face. "What do we do now?" Anthony exchanged glances with the others before answering, "We're meeting Raphael Campbell tomorrow. He says he has access to documents that prove an institutionalized pattern of behavior. If that's true, we can expose not just the officers who approached you, but the entire system that protects them." That night, as the case gained more national attention, Raphael Campbell worked late on his computer at the precinct. Everyone had already gone home, and he took advantage of the solitude to gather evidence of what he internally called Operation Filter, an unofficial procedure that guided officers to conduct selective approaches in affluent areas, aiming to maintain the standard of the location. While copying documents to a USB device, Raphael didn't notice he was being observed through a hidden camera installed at his desk. In the precinct commander's office, a monitor displayed his every move. The next morning, the meeting with Raphael was scheduled for 10 a.m. at a discreet cafe near Grant Park. Anthony arrived half an hour early, as was his custom since his army days, and chose a table with a view of the entrance. Marina and Louise would arrive shortly after. At 10:15, Raphael still hadn't appeared. At 10:30, Anthony began to worry. "He's not answering his phone," informed Marina, after another attempt to contact him. "Something's wrong," concluded Anthony. "Let's go to the precinct." At the 37th Precinct, they were informed that Raphael had requested medical leave that morning. "He called early, said he had flu symptoms," informed the receptionist, a lady with a tired expression. "He should be back next week." Anthony and Marina exchanged concerned looks. As they left the precinct, Marina spoke in a low voice. "He never mentioned being sick when we set up the meeting last night. We need to find him," decided Anthony. "Can Carlos locate his address?" Back at Marina's office, Carlos was already working on his computer, trying to track Raphael. "I found his address, but we need to be careful. If he's being monitored, our visit could put him at greater risk." "I have an idea," said Louise, who had joined the group. "I can go as a doctor claiming a house call requested by the patient himself." The plan was quickly elaborated. Louise, with her lab coat and medical bag, would be the only one to approach Raphael's apartment. The others would wait nearby, ready to intervene if necessary. The building where Raphael lived was simple, located in a middle-class neighborhood. Louise went up to the 4th floor and rang the doorbell of apartment 42. There was no response. She tried several more times and was about to give up when she noticed an envelope partially visible under the door. Crouching down with the excuse, Of tying her shoe, she managed to discreetly pull the envelope. Inside was a memory card and a handwritten note. For those seeking the truth, beware of cameras at the precinct. Louise quickly stored the envelope in her bag and left the building, trying to maintain a natural appearance. In the car, she showed the discovery to the others. He knew we would come looking for him, concluded Anthony. Carlos, we need to see what's on this card as soon as possible. Back at the office, Carlos inserted the card into his protected laptop. The files revealed much more than they expected. Internal documents detailing Operation Filter, records of selective approaches categorized by race and social class, and most disturbing, an informal scoring system that rewarded officers who kept certain areas free of undesirable elements. This is much bigger than we imagined, said Marina, going through the documents. It's not just two racist cops, it's an unofficial institutional policy. Louise observed the files with a mixture of horror and validation. All her life she had felt the weight of racism, but seeing discrimination systematized in official documents was different. How are we going to use this information? She asked. If we go directly to the press, they'll discredit everything as fabrication. Anthony, who was analyzing a floor plan of the precinct found among the files, had an idea forming in his mind. According to these documents, there's a room at the back of the precinct where they kept physical records of unofficial approaches. We need to access it. Impossible, commented Lieutenant Oliver, who until then had been observing in silence. The security is rigorous. Not so impossible, replied Anthony with a gleam in his eyes that Louise recognized from his most determined days. I have a plan. While they detailed the next steps, Peter arrived home from school. Noticing his parents' absence, he called, Louise. Mom, there's a car parked in front of our building that's been there for hours. 2 men are inside watching the entrance. Louise felt a chill run down her spine. Peter, listen carefully. Don't go home. Go directly to Aunt Christine's house and stay there until I come get you. Don't tell anyone where you are. What's happening, Mom? Just a precaution, son. Everything will be fine. After hanging up, Louise informed the others about the situation. They're watching our home, she said, with a tense voice. That means they know what we're doing. Or suspect, corrected Anthony. If they knew for certain, they wouldn't just be watching. We need to act quickly. Marina suggested, we should take this information to a judge friend of mine. He could issue a warrant to officially investigate. And risk someone alerting. The precinct before we can obtain the physical evidence, questioned Carlos. We don't know how far this network extends. Carlos is right, agreed Anthony. We need the physical evidence from the secret room before involving any official authority. The plan they developed was risky, but necessary. Using Carlos's technical knowledge, they would access the precinct's security system. Lieutenant Oliver, using his army contacts, would obtain uniforms and IDs that would allow Anthony and Marina to enter the building as security inspectors. And me, asked Louise, what's my role? You're our guarantee, answered Anthony. Tomorrow you'll be interviewed again, this time by 60 Minutes. While all attention is on you, we'll have our chance to access the precinct. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially to subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us who are just starting out. Now continuing, the next morning the plan was put into action. While Louise prepared for the interview that would be broadcast live to the entire country, Anthony and Marina, dressed as public security inspectors, headed to the 37th precinct. With convincing documents prepared by Carlos and uniforms borrowed by Lieutenant Oliver, they entered the building without raising suspicions. They were received by the officer on duty, who didn't question the surprise inspection. We're verifying the facility's compliance with the new security protocols, explained Anthony, with the natural authority of someone used to giving orders. We need access to all areas, including archives and storage. The officer, a young man under 30, seemed nervous. Some areas require special authorization, sir. We have authorization from the General Command, stated Marina, displaying an official document with impressive seals and signatures, although technically without legal value. It's a routine check due to new state guidelines. After some phone, calls and superficial verifications, they received access to circulate through the building. The room indicated in Raphael's documents was in the basement, identified only as Technical Archive. Meanwhile, in the studios of the country's largest television network, Louise was preparing to go live. Her phone vibrated with a message from Anthony. "We're in. Stay calm and shine as always." That small text gave her the strength she needed. When the cameras turned on, Louise was serene and determined. The interviewer, a nationally respected journalist, began by recalling the case. "Dr. Carter, your complaint has caused national commotion. Since your last interview, dozens of similar reports have emerged from people who went through the same situation. How do you feel being a catalyst for this movement?" "I feel honored to be able to give voice to so many people who have been silenced for years," responded Louise, "but also sad to know that my experience isn't the exception. It's the rule for many Americans." The interview continued with Louise eloquently articulating not just about her personal case, but about structural racism in American institutions. Her medical training and clear way of explaining complex concepts made her a perfect interviewee, able to translate profound sociological issues into accessible language. At the precinct, Anthony and Marina had located the room mentioned in the documents. As expected, it was locked with a more sophisticated system than the other doors. "Looks like we've found what we were looking for," murmured Anthony, examining the lock. "Carlos, we're in position. I need help with this system." Through the hidden communicator in his ear, Carlos instructed, "Connect the device I gave you to the USB port next to the lock. I'll access it remotely." After some tense minutes, during which an officer passed through the corridor without noticing anything suspicious, the light on the lock changed from red to green. "Done. You have 5 minutes before the system resets," warned Carlos. Inside the room, they found exactly what they feared: methodically organized files, documenting years of discriminatory approaches. There were photos, internal reports, and, most disturbing, a map of the city, with areas marked as priority filtering zones, coincidentally, all in affluent neighborhoods. "This is gold," said Marina, discreetly photographing the most relevant documents with a special camera provided by Carlos. Anthony found a locked drawer in a desk in the corner of the room. Using techniques learned in his years of service, he managed to open it without leaving marks. Inside was an external hard drive and a folder labeled Contingency. "What do we have here?" he murmured, examining the contents. The folder contained detailed instructions on how to proceed in case of complaints that gained repercussion. Tactics to discredit victims, models of false reports, and, more alarmingly, a list of journalists and authorities who could be activated to cover up problematic cases. "We have to take this," decided Anthony. "But they'll notice the disappearance," warned Marina. "Not if we make it look like a technical problem," Anthony smiled, taking a small device provided by Carlos from his pocket. "This will corrupt their file system in a way that will look like a power failure." While installing the device on the EU room's computer, the communicator in his ear came to life. "Anthony, Marina, you need to leave now," Carlos's urgent voice sounded. "I just intercepted communications. The precinct captain is on his way, called for an emergency meeting about Louise's case." They quickly stored everything they had collected. Before leaving, Anthony activated the device that would corrupt the room's digital systems, leaving a trail that would appear accidental. They left the precinct maintaining their composure, thanking the officer on duty for his cooperation. Only when they were a few blocks away, in their own car, did they allow themselves to breathe in relief. "We did it," said Marina, checking the collected material. "This is much more than we expected to find." Anthony drove attentively, constantly checking if they were being followed. "Now comes the hardest part, using this information the right way." Back at the television studio, Louise was concluding her interview with a statement that moved the nation. "What I'm asking for is not special treatment. I don't want privileges. I just want the basics: respect, dignity, and equality. I want a country where my son can walk without fear, where the color of his skin isn't an invitation for humiliation. That's not asking too much. It's asking for the minimum." When the cameras turned off, her phone vibrated again. It was a message from Anthony. "Mission accomplished. We have everything. Meet us at Marina's office." At the office, the team gathered to analyze the collected material. The external hard drive contained a real goldmine. Security camera recordings showing dozens of abusive approaches, internal documents detailing the filtering policy, and, most shocking, an unofficial reward system for officers who kept certain areas clean. "This goes beyond the precinct," observed Lieutenant Oliver, examining some documents. "There are indications that the higher command is aware of these practices." "And now?" asked Louise. "Who do we take this to? If the problem is systemic, we can't trust conventional authorities." Marina, who had remained thoughtful, finally spoke. "I know a federal judge, Judge Helen Vance. She chairs a working group on reforms in the public security system. She's honest and courageous." "Can we trust her?" questioned Anthony. "If we can't trust her, we can't trust anyone," affirmed Marina. "She has always been a solitary voice against institutional abuses." The decision was made. They would schedule a meeting with Judge Helen for the next day. Until then, Carlos would make copies of all the material and store them in secure locations. Before they separated, Anthony asked to speak. "All of you are taking enormous risks. I want you to know that you can back out at any moment without judgment. We're in this together until the end," responded Marina with determination in her gaze. Louise squeezed her husband's hand. "It's not just about me anymore. It's about changing a system that fails so many people daily." As they returned to Christine's house to pick up Peter, Louise received a call from an unknown number. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Dr. Carter." The voice was low, almost a whisper. "This is Raphael Campbell." "Raphael, where are you? We've been worried." "I'm safe for now," he responded. "I discovered they were watching me through cameras at the precinct. I had to leave in a hurry." "We received your documents. Thank you for your courage." "There's one more thing you need to know," continued Raphael. "Operation Filter isn't just local. There are indications of similar programs in at least 5 other states." Louise exchanged alarmed looks with Anthony, who was driving intently. "How did you discover this?" "In integration meetings between police forces. They don't worry about hiding much when they think everyone in the room shares the same mentality," explained Raphael. "I need to hang up now, but I'll contact you again. Be careful." The call ended abruptly, leaving Louise with more questions than answers. When they arrived at Christine's house, they found Peter anxious for news. "Everything's okay, son," assured Louise, hugging him. "But as a precaution, you're going to spend a few days at Uncle Robert's house in the suburbs." "But Mum, I have a test at school next week." "Your safety is more important," intervened Anthony, in a tone that didn't admit contestation. "Your Aunt Christine will go with you. We've already talked to the school. They'll send study materials by email." Although reluctant, Peter understood the gravity of the situation. Before they separated, Anthony had a private conversation with his son. "Peter, I trust you to be strong at this moment. Your mother is doing something very important, not just for our family, but for many people." "I know, Dad," responded the teenager, more mature than his 17 years suggested. "I'm proud of her, of both of you." That night, while Carlos worked on copies of the documents and Lieutenant Oliver arranged security for the meeting with the Judge, Louise and Anthony finally had a moment of tranquility at home. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" asked Louise as they prepared for bed. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm unnecessarily putting everyone in danger." Anthony sat beside her on the bed and took her hands. "When I left the army, I promised myself I wouldn't stay silent in the face of injustice anymore. Then I met you and saw how you face daily small and large battles without ever losing your humanity." He paused, carefully choosing his words. "What we're doing is dangerous, yes, but necessary. If not us, then who?" Louise rested her head on her husband's shoulder, finding comfort in his solid presence. "You know what saddens me the most. It's knowing that for every case like mine that gains visibility, there are thousands that are silenced. That's why we can't stop," responded Anthony. "It's not just about justice for you, but about changing an entire system." The next morning, they prepared for the meeting with Judge Helen Vance. Marina had scheduled the meeting at a neutral location, a law office belonging to a trusted friend, Upon arrival, they were received by the judge herself, a middle-aged woman with perceptive eyes and elegant posture. "Marina explained the situation to me in general terms," she said after initial greetings. "But I need to see the evidence for myself." During the next 2 hours, they methodically presented all the collected material. Judge Helen's expression alternated between shock and indignation as she comprehended the magnitude of the situation. "This is much more serious than I imagined," she admitted finally. "These aren't just isolated cases of police racism. It's a deliberate policy with methodology, records, and approval from superiors. The question is, what can we do?" asked Louise. "If we take this through conventional channels, we fear it will be hushed up, or that the evidence will disappear." The judge reflected for a few moments before responding. "We need a two-front strategy. One visible, public, that keeps media and society's attention on the case. And another behind the scenes, to ensure the evidence reaches the right people and those responsible are properly prosecuted." "We already have the public front," observed Marina. "Louise has become a symbol in this fight." "And the other front?" questioned Anthony. "Leave that to me," responded Judge Helen. "I chair a working group at the National Council on Justice about reforms in the security system. We have authority to open special investigations without going through conventional channels that might be compromised." The meeting continued with the detailing of the plan. Judge Helen would need a few days to mobilize the special investigation group, during which Louise would continue giving interviews, keeping the case under the media spotlight. When they left the office, they felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. For the first time, they had a concrete path to justice, but they knew the next few days would be crucial and potentially dangerous. "We need to double our security precautions," warned Anthony as they returned home. "Now that we have a federal judge on our side, things could escalate quickly." The next day, as Louise prepared for another interview, she received an urgent call from Christine, who was with Peter in the Eus suburbs. "Louise, there's been a car parked in front of the house since last night," she informed with a tense voice. "Two men are taking shifts, always watching the entrance." Louise's heart raced. "Are you all right? Have you contacted anyone?" "We're locked inside the house. Robert called some trusted friends to stay with us, but I'm worried, Louise." "Don't worry." Louise tried to sound more confident than she felt. "I'll resolve this immediately." After hanging up, she called Anthony, who was meeting with Lieutenant Oliver. "They're watching Robert's house. Peter is in danger." Without wasting time, Anthony mobilized. "I'll ask Carlos to check the security cameras on the street. Lieutenant, do you have any trusted contacts in that area?" "I have some army friends who live nearby. I can contact them immediately." While Anthony coordinated Peter's protection, Louise contacted Judge Helen. "Things are escalating faster than we anticipated," she explained. "They're watching our son." "This confirms we're on the right track," responded the judge. "I'll expedite the procedures. Meanwhile, I suggest you maintain your public commitments. The more visibility you have, the less they'll risk doing something direct." The logic made sense, but it didn't alleviate Louise's anguish. As a mother, her instinct was to run to protect her son. As a citizen determined to change an unjust system, she knew she needed to continue. That afternoon's interview was with an independent internet channel that had gained notoriety for its investigative journalism. Unlike the major networks, which treated the case as one news item among many, the channel dedicated a 1-hour special to discuss not just the approach Louise had suffered, but the larger context of institutional racism in America. "Dr. Carter, many people are wondering about the risks you and your family are taking by exposing this case so publicly," commented the interviewer, a young black journalist. "Do you fear retaliation?" The question hit Louise directly, especially considering the news about the surveillance of her son. After a brief moment of reflection, she answered honestly, "Fear? Yes, I'm afraid. It would be irresponsible not to fear when we challenge such deeply rooted power structures. But my fear isn't greater than my indignation or my hope for change." She paused, carefully choosing her next words. "I have a 17-year-old son. Every time he leaves the house, I feel a tightness in my chest, thinking if he'll be the next to be humiliated, assaulted, or worse, just for being a young black man. This daily fear of thousands of mothers like me is much greater than any fear of retaliation for speaking the truth. The response resonated with thousands of viewers who immediately shared excerpts of the interview on social media. Within hours, the hashtag Yacha for Louise's son became one of the most discussed topics in the country. Meanwhile, in the suburbs, the operation to protect Peter was underway. Lieutenant Oliver had mobilized 3 trusted ex-military men who now conducted discreet counter-surveillance at Robert's house. Carlos, analyzing images from neighborhood security cameras, managed to identify the license plate of the suspicious car. "I have news," he informed Anthony by phone. "The vehicle is registered to a private security company called Sentinel Protections. Guess who's one of the partners? Some police officer involved in the scheme. Better, Major Lucas Andrews himself, who gave that interview defending the department. The information was explosive. A high-ranking officer of the police department was a partner in a company that was clearly involved in intimidation. We need to inform Judge Helen immediately," decided Anthony. "This could be the link we needed to prove that corruption reaches the higher ranks." The judge received the information with interest. "This strengthens our case. I've already received authorization to form a special task force with federal agents not linked to local structures. We'll be ready to act in 48 hours. "And what about my son?" asked Louise, who had joined the call. "I suggest moving him to an even safer location, preferably out of state," recommended the judge, "just as a precaution until we can guarantee everyone's safety." After the call, Anthony and Louise discussed the options. Finally, they decided that Peter would be taken to Anthony's cousin's house in Wisconsin, a remote location where he would be difficult to find. "I don't like being separated from him," confessed Louise, "but I know it's the safest option right now." "It's just for a few days," consoled Anthony. "Soon all this will be resolved and we can return to living normally." The operation to transfer Peter was carefully planned. Using a distraction created by Lieutenant Oliver's friends, they managed to get the teenager and Christine out of the house without being noticed by the watchers. Within hours, they were on their way to Wisconsin, accompanied by a trusted friend of Anthony's. With Peter safe, the team could concentrate all efforts on the next steps. Carlos continued analyzing the documents obtained from the precinct, finding more and more connections between Operation Filter and similar schemes in other cities. "This is systematic," he concluded, showing his findings to the group gathered at Marina's office. "There are indications of national coordination." Judge Helen, who was participating remotely in the meeting, added, "The data you provided is being cross-referenced with other ongoing investigations. We're finding similar patterns in at least 3 other states." "When can we expect concrete actions?" asked Louise, tired but determined. "The operation is scheduled for the day after tomorrow, simultaneously in multiple locations," informed the judge. "We need you completely removed on that day. Any leak could compromise everything." In the following days, Louise continued giving interviews, now focusing not just on her personal case, but on the larger issue of structural racism in American institutions. Her medical training and ability to articulate complex concepts in accessible language made her a respected voice in the national debate. On the eve of the operation coordinated by Judge Helen, Louise received an invitation to participate in a televised debate with Major Andrews. After consulting Anthony and the judge, she decided to accept. "It's risky, but it could be a perfect distraction," evaluated Anthony. "While all attention is on the debate, the operation can happen more smoothly." The debate was scheduled for 7 p.m. primetime television. While preparing backstage, Louise received a message from Raphael Campbell. "Be careful, they're desperate. They have a plan to discredit you during the program." Alarmed but determined not to back down, Louise entered the studio with the dignified posture that had become her trademark. Major Andrews was already there, apparently calm in his impeccable uniform. The host introduced the topic and started the debate. In the first few minutes, the discussion followed a predictable path. Louise relating her experience and advocating for structural changes, while the major reaffirmed the institution's commitment to legality, minimizing the incident as an isolated case. That's when the major, with a confident smile, turned to her. Dr. Carter, you've talked a lot about honesty and transparency. Would you care to comment on the report we received that your husband, former Colonel Morgan, allegedly broke into a precinct posing as an inspector? The studio fell silent. Louise felt her heart race but maintained a serene expression. She had been prepared by Anthony for the possibility of traps during the debate. Major Andrews, it's interesting that you mentioned break-ins and false identities, she responded, without losing her composure, especially considering that a private security company of which you are a partner has been illegally watching my teenage son. It was the Major's turn to look astonished. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm talking about Sentinel protections, registered in your name and those of 2 other high-ranking officers, the same company whose vehicles have been following members of my family in recent days. Louise made a calculated pause. I imagine you have all the judicial authorizations for this surveillance, don't you? The host, perceiving the gravity of the mutual accusations, tried to intervene. We have serious allegations from both sides that... Louise gently interrupted him. With all due respect, these are not equivalent allegations. I have proof of what I claim, including photographic records, vehicle license plates, and official documentation of the Major's company. At that moment, her phone vibrated with a message from Anthony. Operation started. Task force entering the precinct now. With renewed confidence, Louise continued. Major, do you know what Operation Filter is? The direct question made the officer visibly pale. There is no operation with that name, he responded, adjusting his tie. How interesting, continued Louise. Because at this exact moment a federal task force authorized by the National Council on Justice is accessing documents about this operation not just at the 37th Precinct, but at various police units across the country. The studio erupted in murmurs. The host, realizing he was witnessing breaking news live, tried to regain control. Doctor, are you stating that there's a federal operation underway at this moment? I'm merely informing that the federal justice, after receiving concrete evidence of systematic practices of racial profiling and abuse of authority, is taking appropriate measures, responded Louise, careful not to compromise details of the operation. Something that should have happened a long time ago. The Major, visibly nervous, asked to leave, claiming he needed to verify urgent information. The debate continued with Louise alone, answering questions from the host and invited experts about institutional racism and the need for profound reforms. At the end of the program, while removing her microphone, she received another message from Anthony. Total success, dozens of arrests, including captains and high-ranking officers, documentation seized in 7 cities. Come to Marina's office. At the office, she found the group gathered, following the news on multiple screens. Carlos was showing live images of federal agents entering police stations in Chicago, New York, Atlanta, and other major cities. It worked, said Marina, embracing Louise. Judge Helen did it. It's the largest anti-corruption police operation in the country's recent history. Anthony showed Louise the main seizures, servers with thousands of recordings of illegal approaches, documents detailing the filtering policy, and most impressively, financial records showing a scheme of embezzlement of public resources associated with the discriminatory operations. This goes far beyond racism, he explained. They found evidence that the selective approach was linked to a larger scheme of extortion and irregular protection. Louise absorbed the information with a mixture of relief and astonishment. And what about Major Andrews? Arrested 20 minutes ago as he was trying to leave the TV station, informed Lieutenant Oliver. Apparently he tried to remotely delete some files, which only strengthened the evidence against him. The night was long, with constant updates about the national operation. Judge Helen kept them informed about each new development. When the sun rose, America woke up to headlines about Operation Transparency, as it was officially called, which resulted in the arrest of dozens of officers and the seizure of tons of incriminating documents. In the following days, Raphael Campbell reappeared, now formally protected as a key witness in the case. His detailed testimony about the years working at the precinct and observing discriminatory practices helped solidify the accusations even further. Peter returned home, relieved to be reunited with his parents. The threats had ceased with the arrests of the main individuals involved. A week after the operation, Louise was invited by the newly appointed National Secretary of Public Security to join a special commission that would reformulate police approach protocols across the country. "We want your experience, both as a victim and as a qualified professional, to help create new guidelines," explained the secretary during the meeting. "I accept, with one condition," responded Louise. "I want former police officers like Raphael Campbell, who had the courage to report abuses, to also be part of this commission. And most importantly, I want representatives from the communities most affected by these practices to have an active voice in the process." The secretary agreed, and thus was born what would later be known as the Morgan Protocol, a set of rigorous guidelines to ensure respectful police approaches based on concrete evidence and free from prejudice. Anthony, in turn, was invited to return to public service, now as the coordinator of a permanent task force against abuse of authority. His military experience, combined with his independent investigative work, made him the ideal candidate for the position. 1 year after the approach that changed their lives, Louise and Anthony participated in a ceremony at the Supreme Court, where the Morgan Protocol was officially adopted as a mandatory national guideline for all security forces in the country. In the audience, Peter proudly watched, alongside Raphael Campbell and so many others who had contributed to that achievement. After the ceremony, a young man timidly approached Louise. "Doctor, my name is John Paul. My father was a victim of a violent police encounter 3 years ago. He never got justice." The young man paused, emotional. "Inspired by your courage, I decided to enter the police academy. I want to be part of the change from within." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially to subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Louise hugged the young man, deeply touched. "That's how change happens," she said, "one person at a time, deciding to do things differently." In the following weeks, cases of police abuse continued to emerge, but now with a crucial difference. They were quickly investigated with transparency and concrete results. The secret room at the 37th Precinct, where so many abuses had been documented and hidden, was transformed into a memorial to victims of institutional violence and a training center on respectful approaches. Raphael Campbell, now protected by the Federal Witness Program, decided to use his experience to train new police officers on how to identify and resist toxic cultures within departments. "My greatest lesson was realizing that silence makes us complicit," he would say in the lectures he gave to cadets. "We need to have the courage to speak up when we witness injustices, even when it seems impossible to change the system." Anthony, leading the National Task Force, implemented monitoring systems that allowed real-time tracking of approach patterns in different regions, quickly identifying deviations that suggested discriminatory practices. "It's not enough to punish after abuse happens," he explained in a meeting with police commanders from across the country. "We need to create systems that make institutional prejudice visible before it causes harm." For Louise, the transformation was even more personal. Besides her work on the Reform Commission and her role as a doctor, she became a respected voice in the national debate on structural racism. Her lectures filled auditoriums, and her book, Beyond the Approach, A Call for Institutional Change, became required reading in law schools and police academies. Most important of all, however, was the change she saw in Peter, the teenager who previously avoided discussions about racism out of fear and discomfort, now led a group of young people at his school that promoted debates on citizenship and rights. "You know what makes me most proud, Mom?" he said one night as they had dinner as a family. "It's seeing that other people are losing their fear of speaking out. Your example showed that it's possible to fight and win, even when the system seems impenetrable." Louise smiled, moved. She knew the fight was far from over. Structural racism and abuses of authority wouldn't disappear overnight, even with all the implemented reforms. But something fundamental had changed. The silence had been broken, and now there was real hope for transformation. On a Saturday morning, as she walked calmly through the same mall where it all began, Louise noticed something different. a police officer was politely approaching a young black man who seemed lost, offering guidance with respect and professionalism. On the officer's uniform, a small badge indicated that he had undergone training in the Morgan Protocol. Small changes, one step at a time. That's how transformation happened in the real world. Not through instant revolutions, but through the persistent work of people determined to make a difference, day after day. That night, at a ceremony at the Department of Justice, Louise received an invitation she had never imagined: the position of National Secretary of Human Rights. Your combination of personal experience, technical training, and capacity for dialogue makes you the ideal person for this historic moment, explained the minister. We need someone who can be a bridge between institutions and civil society. After consulting Anthony and Peter, Louise accepted the challenge. It would be one more step in the journey that had begun so traumatically, but which now represented hope for so many people. In her inauguration speech, she spoke directly to the cameras, knowing her words would reach homes across America. A year ago, I was publicly humiliated by police officers who judged me solely by the color of my skin. Today I assume a position where I can work to ensure no one else goes through what I went through. I don't come driven by vengeance or resentment, but by the firm conviction that we can and must be better as a society. True security isn't born from fear or intimidation, but from mutual respect and justice accessible to all, regardless of race, social class, or any other characteristic. The reforms implemented from Louise's case continued to bear fruit. Police violence rates began to fall across the country. More significantly, opinion polls showed a gradual increase in public confidence in law enforcement, especially among historically marginalized communities. Former Colonel Anthony Morgan, now promoted to general and responsible for the national implementation of the protocol that bore his surname, frequently reminded everyone that true change wasn't just in laws and regulations, but in institutional culture. We're relearning the meaning of public safety, he would say in his lectures to new officers. It's not just about fighting crime, but about serving and protecting the population, the entire population. Raphael Campbell, who initially feared for his life when reporting the abuses, now coordinated a whistleblower protection program within law enforcement. His personal experience made him especially sensitive to the challenges faced by those who chose to break the code of silence. The greatest weapon of corrupt systems is isolation, he explained. They make you believe you're alone, that no one will support your complaint. We're changing that, creating networks of protection and support. For Peter, who was now preparing to enter university, his mother's transformation from victim to agent of national change was a daily source of inspiration. Determined to pursue a career in human rights, he frequently accompanied Louise to public events, absorbing knowledge and building his own vision of how to contribute to a more just country. On a special afternoon during the inauguration of a police training center that would implement the new guidelines on a national scale, Louise was surprised by a group of young cadets who asked to take a picture with her. "You're our example," said a young black woman among them. "We joined the police because we believe it's possible to serve with dignity and respect." Moved, Louise realized that her personal story had transformed into something much greater, a symbol of the possibility of change in a system that for so long had seemed immutable. That night, at home with Anthony and Peter, she reflected on the journey of the past few years. "Sometimes I still wonder if all this would have happened if I weren't married to a former colonel," she confessed. "How many black women are approached this way every day and never get justice?" "That's why your work is so important now," responded Anthony, holding her hand. "You're opening doors so that other people, regardless of who their husbands or family members are, can have access to justice." Peter, who was listening attentively to the conversation, added, "Mom, remember what you always say in your lectures, that the true measure of a just society isn't how it treats its most privileged citizens, but how it protects its most vulnerable." Louise smiled, proud of her son and the wisdom he demonstrated. "That's true, and that's why we can't stop. There's still so much to do." 2 years after the encounter in the parking lot, the changes were becoming increasingly visible. The Morgan Protocol was implemented in more than 70% of the country's police forces. The rates of reports of abuse of authority had significantly decreased, while the resolution rate of reported cases increased. More importantly, independent research showed a reduction in racial disparities in police approaches. At an international symposium on public safety and human rights, Louise was invited to share the American experience. Her presentation, titled "From Humiliation to Transformation: Rebuilding Trust Between Police and Society," received attention from experts and authorities from various countries. America is becoming a laboratory for innovative public policies in the area of security, commented a UN expert after the event. Dr. Carter's case shows how an individual traumatic experience can catalyze systemic changes when there's courage and determination. For Sergeant Richardson and Officer Martinez, the police officers who had approached Louise on that fateful day, the outcome was significant. After administrative and criminal proceedings, they were discharged from the force and sentenced to perform community service in social projects in peripheral communities. Part of their sentence included participating in courses on the history of racism and racial inequality in America. Ironically, Sergeant Richardson, after serving his sentence, became a vocal advocate for police reform, frequently giving lectures on how institutional culture had shaped his abusive behavior. "I'm not seeking justifications, but understanding," he explained in a documentary about the case. "I was trained in a system that normalizes discrimination. This doesn't exempt me from responsibility, but shows that we need to change from the basic training of agents." On a sunny afternoon, while participating in the graduation of the first class of police officers fully trained under the new guidelines, Louise met Raphael Campbell, now out of the protection program, and officially working as a police ethics consultant. "We did it, didn't we?" he said, observing the young cadets who were swearing to serve society with respect and dignity. "We've started," corrected Louise with a smile. "There's still a long road ahead, but at least now we know it's possible." At home, kept in a special box, Louise maintained the newspaper clipping from the day after her encounter. The headline, "Black Female Doctor Reports Racist Police Encounter," was a constant reminder of how it all began. Beside it, a more recent photo showed her, Anthony, and Peter at the ceremony for the national implementation of the Morgan Protocol. That journey, which had begun with humiliation and fear, had transformed into a movement larger than themselves. Proof that even in the most entrenched systems, change is possible when courageous people decide they will no longer accept injustice as normal. In a special ceremony at the White House, the President of the United States signed the law that transformed the Morgan Protocol into a permanent national obligation, ensuring that the changes would survive different governments and administrations. "This law doesn't bear the name of a politician or an abstract theory," said the President during the ceremony. "It bears the name of a family that faced injustice and, instead of just seeking individual reparation, fought for changes that would benefit millions of Americans. It's a reminder that true social transformation often begins with the courage of individuals who refuse to accept the unacceptable." Louise, Anthony, and Peter, seated in the front row, felt the historical weight of that moment. The path had been difficult, with threats, fear, and moments of discouragement, but each obstacle overcome had strengthened their determination. "I never imagined that encounter in the parking lot would bring us here," whispered Louise to Anthony as they applauded the presidential speech. "You transformed pain into purpose," he replied, squeezing her hand. "That's what great leaders do." As they left the ceremony, a young reporter approached Louise for a quick interview. "Doctor, after everything that happened, what message would you leave for people who face discrimination and feel they can't do anything to change the system?" Louise thought for a moment before responding. "I would say never underestimate the power of a determined voice. Oppressive systems depend on our silence and our sense of powerlessness. When we refuse to be silent, when we document injustices, when we unite with others who share our experiences, we create cracks in these systems. And it's through these cracks that light enters and transformation begins. It won't be easy or quick, but it's possible. Our story proves that." Months later, Official statistics confirmed what many already felt on the streets: a significant reduction in reports of police abuses, especially against black people. Body cameras, now mandatory in all approaches, served both to protect citizens against abuses and to defend officers from unfounded accusations. At an event at the University of Chicago, where Louise was a frequent guest in the human rights course, a student raised an important question. "Doctor, do you believe the changes we're seeing are permanent, or is there a risk of regression?" "No social achievement is permanent without constant vigilance," responded Louise frankly. "What we've built in recent years can indeed be dismantled if we become complacent. That's why it's so important to form new conscious generations who understand that rights aren't gifts granted by benevolent rulers, but achievements that need to be constantly defended." In her new role as National Secretary of Human Rights, Louise worked tirelessly to institutionalize the changes, ensuring they would survive different governments and political contexts. Part of her strategy involved creating community safety councils, where ordinary citizens actively participated in monitoring police practices in their neighborhoods. "Public safety cannot be decided only in offices by experts distant from reality," she explained at a national congress. "We need the active participation of communities, especially those most affected by institutional violence." Anthony, in turn, dedicated himself to transforming the internal culture of security forces. His training program for high-ranking officers, focused on ethical leadership and institutional responsibility, became an international reference. "True change must come from within," he would say. "It's not enough to impose rules from the top down. We need the leaders of the corporations themselves to understand and value an approach based on respect and evidence, not on prejudice and stereotypes." Peter, now a law student specializing in human rights, frequently accompanied his parents to events and debates. His perspective as a young black man who had witnessed discrimination up close, as well as the reform process, brought a valuable dimension to the discussions. In a lecture to high school students, he shared his personal vision. "When I saw my mother being humiliated by police officers in that parking lot, my first reaction was anger and fear. Anger at seeing someone I love being treated that way, and fear that the same would happen to me. What I've learned over these years is that we can transform these emotions into constructive action. Anger can become determination, and fear can become courage when we understand that we're not alone in this fight." In a country where racial inequality persisted in so many areas, the changes in the public security system represented a beacon of hope. The Carter case, as it had become nationally known, demonstrated that profound transformations were possible when there was political will, social mobilization, and committed leadership. 5 years after the encounter in the parking lot, Louise received the UN Human Rights Award, an international recognition for the work developed in the United States. In her acceptance speech, she spoke about the importance of giving names and faces to discrimination statistics. Behind each number in reports on police violence or institutional discrimination, there's a person with dreams, family, a lifetime of experiences. When we begin to see these numbers as real people, it becomes impossible to accept injustice as normality. That's what happened in America. My personal story connected with thousands of other similar stories, creating a powerful movement for change. The legacy of the Morgan Protocol expanded beyond police forces, influencing reforms in other public institutions. Employees of various agencies, from hospitals to social assistance agencies, underwent training on unconscious biases and how to avoid discrimination in public service. In a world where systemic changes often seemed impossible, Louise and her family's trajectory offered a roadmap of hope. Document abuses, build strategic alliances, use media effectively, and above all, never accept that things have always been this way as a justification for injustice. On a quiet afternoon, as she walked through the same mall where it all began, Louise observed a scene that deeply moved her. A black police officer, identifiable by the Morgan Protocol badge on his uniform, was politely guiding a group of teenagers who had been reported for suspicious behavior by a shopkeeper. Instead of intimidation or aggressive approach, what was seen was respectful dialogue. "This is what we've worked so hard for," she commented to Anthony, who accompanied her. "For dignified approaches to be the rule, not the exception, and so that no other person has to go through what you went through to obtain this change," he added, affectionately squeezing her hand. In the new reality they helped build, justice was gradually becoming more accessible to everyone, regardless of who they were or what connections they had. It was an unfinished process with constant challenges, but the direction was clear: an America where respect for human dignity would not just be theory, but daily practice. The end. So what did you think of Louise and Anthony's story? Your opinion about the fight against institutional racism matters a lot to us. Leave your like, comment with your reflections, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more narratives that challenge and inspire.